a land of wheat and barley, granted, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full and have built beautiful houses, God cares about what kind of accommodation you've put up for yourself. When you have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks, that is cows and goats, multiply, and your silver and your gold are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied. When your heart is lifted up and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness, in which were fierce serpents and scorpions, and a thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you from a flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna. He might test you to do you good in the end. Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gained me this wealth. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your name of the Lord. I want to give you an example. When the Jewish people were invaded by the Roman forces in 70 AD, and they were taken into captivity and spread out across the nations of the world. Since that time, the first century of the church, the land of Israel had very, very few Jews, and other people from other nations came and occupied the land. They occupied it for almost 2,000 years. And all those 2,000 years, the land of Israel was a desert, was fruitless, was unattractive, was rocky. It was something that nobody really thought much about. And unlike it had no oil. So there was no real sense of wealth. When man thinks of wealth, he thinks of oil, maybe gold and all that. But the land of Israel was in the hands of Gentiles for 248. We see the rebirth of Israel. We see the coming back of a nation that was not existent called Israel. It came back on the map of the world. And if you see the transformation of the land of Israel from 1940 to today, it's just about 60 years. It's amazing. They still don't have oil, and they don't have many rivers. There is one major river, the River Jordan. One big lake. Another sea in the south, which is, you can't take the water, the Red Sea. The water there is salty, so salty. Nobody can, even if you go into that water and you come out, after some time you feel your entire skin is itching because the salt gets into the skin and begins to work on any impurities you have in your body. I want to say to you, if you go to the land of Israel today, you may not understand. It's one of the most fertile lands in the whole world. They have the best fruits, food, even the things I know from history. There are things they got from Uganda in the past years when they were helping Uganda before the relations went bad in the Idi Amin days. Even the things they got from Uganda and took to Israel, you may think Israel is the originator of them. They grow them 100 times better than Uganda does. The tilapia fish, more abundance than we have it here. The irrigation system, and I will not go into details, but they don't irrigate by just splashing water. They developed a system that just drops a drip right at the root of the tree. And in that drip, there is all the fertilizers and all the chemicals that are needed by that tree. They don't waste water. They can go 4 years without rain. And they depend on the Sea of Galilee to take water all over the country. And when it rains, then they have a way of sustaining that water so that it can carry them for a number of years. The Sea of Galilee, maybe if it was in Uganda, we would look at it as a waste. They have made the best out of it. The salts, the mud, the healing, therapeutical jellies and all things. People travel to Israel to go just. These are simple things. It's mud. People buy mud. Can you think about that? People buy mud. And people go to pay to go into the sea. You can't swim in that sea. You can just lie on the water and you will float. You will not go down. But they have, I want you to understand, it is He who gives you power to create wealth. And look at what He calls wealth. Let me just go to the scriptures again. So, this is what He says. This is the wealth He has given you. It's up to you to take the power to turn it into. It's not only available to you, but now you can for it. He calls these resources He has put in the promised land, they are brooks of water. That is a resource. Our fountains and springs that flow out of the valleys and the hills. And He talks about wheat and barley, of vines. Vines are grape trees, and fig trees, and pomegranate, a land of oil, olive oil, and honey. Now, I want to challenge especially my brothers and sisters from Africa. Which of these things are not in our land of Africa? And I want to especially challenge those in Uganda. Uganda is known as a land divided by rivers. We have about 5 different lakes. We have rivers crisscrossing the land. We have fountains everywhere. It's very difficult to buy a piece of land in Uganda and there is no fountain. Everywhere. And then crying of poverty and having lack. But the Bible says here, in this land you will eat bread without scarcity. In other words, the food will be abundant and enough. And it says, in which you will lack nothing. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. I love this. If He wanted man to utilize the wealth, why didn't He put all those stones, gold, silver, copper, on the surface? Because He wants man to work. Work is holy, work is pure, work is honorable. So He put gold down there, copper is down there. And He says, the land is yours. When He was creating man, He says, let us create man to rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the reptiles, the animals, and the entire earth. So here He's telling them there is iron in that land. You don't find it on the surface. There is copper. You don't find copper on the surface. And here He says in verse 11, verse 10, 11, Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, your silver and your gold are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied. God knows they cannot find gold on the surface, silver on the surface. But he's saying, I want you to know there is something down there. But you have to get the power, the creativity. Go. Now for us, if you go and read in the, study the Moravians. The Moravians were in Germany, in a place called Herrenhut, under Count Zinzendorf. They were not a mighty, wealthy community, but when they were swept by the revival, their hearts were on fire to take the gospel. And they determined to produce whatever they needed, whether it was baking, growing food, processing the food, building houses, everything the community could do it. Everybody was taken care of. No one lacked. Just as the Bible says in the book of Acts, no one lacked. And then they started schools. They started crafts, workshops where women could be equipped. And remember when I was talking about the Great Commission and the church, I said we need to go back and reconnect with the element, the DNA of the early church, community, gospel communities, as we see in the book of Acts, where they cared for one another, they shared and they provided for each other. Nobody lacked. So that in the end, all of them could focus on the one mission they have, to take the gospel. Even the one who is a carpenter knows, I'm doing this that the gospel may go. The farmer knows, I'm doing this that the gospel may go. The fisherman knows the same. They are all in one accord. Isn't that what Jesus said? Let them be one. And in Acts says they were in one accord. The most missing element in the church today. Even when you find a big congregation, a small congregation, really the people are on their own. Everybody on you find people, you greet one another. How are you? God bless you. But we don't know what is going on in each other's families. We don't know what struggles each one is going through. There's no real one accord. There is no sharing of life. There is no affinity. And this is